Hey everyone, it's Rob Foglia and Jessica Klein with Foglia Properties at Keller Williams here in Nashville. And we're coming to you today to discuss the market and why it's not 2008. I'm excited to talk about this topic. Are you ready to jump in, Jessica?
Sure. This is something that people talk about quite often. Especially when we first started seeing these major changes in the market, you hear a lot of people ask, are we in a bubble? Is this going to be another, big issue? Are we going to have a big swing and a recession and all this stuff? So let's talk about how today compares to that situation in 2006, 8.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably one of the biggest things I hear from our generation as well. People thinking, "Oh, I'm going to wait till the housing market crashes," and I think the psychology behind it is that the last recession that our economy saw was we'll just call it 2008 because that's what we titled our video, and yet it was that time period, and of course the housing market was affected back then, but it wasn't affected necessarily because of the recession. If anything, it kind of drove the recession because of the bad loans that were being written and things along those lines. That's the opposite of what we see right now. And we're going to get into some of the data as to why the market is still, stronger than ever today as compared to what it looked like back then. And yet back then, mortgage companies weren't as strict as they are today. Meaning, like I don't know. Last time, actually, you guys did just buy a car, and so I don't want to get too personal on things, but I can still vividly remember going in to buy a car when I was brand new into real estate. Right, Kelly and I were buying a new car, and they started taking our application. And now, granted, we have good credit and all that, but they started simply asking, "What do you think you're going to make this year?" I was first year in the business. Like, they not how much do you make? What did you report on your taxes? How much are you going to make this year? And the reason I bring that up is that years ago, 15 years ago, that's what the mortgage industry was like. You had stated income loans. You had loans that it was almost like you have a pulse, you can get a mortgage. It's not like that today.
Right. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. So today's real estate market is driven by essentially low supply and high demand. So it's a
Yeah,
combination of those two things. What happened in 2008, like you said, was all about lenders giving people money to buy homes that they couldn't really afford. So that's where
exactly.
you have this artificial inflation of the market. And then eventually people can't afford those houses. And that's what caused the crash. So let's look at what's actually happening today and what that means for people who are buying and selling.
I'm a great transition, Jessica. And so what I've got pulled up here, and y'all may have seen this graph from us a few times over the year and a half or so that we've been doing these live weekly videos. This right here is months of supply of homes for sale, meaning if no other home were to ever hit the market, how long is it going to take everything to sell? When we're in that buyer's market, that rough market, I guess you could say, the market that people are afraid of if they buy a home, that's what the market's going to become, like the what ifs that are going through people's mind when we hear that. They're thinking about a market way back in 2009, 2010, where my mouse is hovering on the screen, where there's 8, 9, 10, 11 months of inventory. We haven't seen a market like that in 10 years, as you can see. And the reason I wanted to point out this historical graph, and we'll dive into what it looks like right now, is you can see that the market didn't change overnight. Even when it went from being a strong buyer's market into a moderate seller's market, that was a 2-year transition. And until it became a strong seller's market, it was really, I mean, you could call that a 3 to 4 year transition from the height of the buyer's market to the real beginnings of the seller's market that we've seen. So it's not an overnight transition. My reason for saying that is while we're in an extreme seller's market right now, we're likely not going to see it be an overnight transition into a buyer's market whenever that happens. It's going to take time, whether it's 12 months, 36 months, 48 months from whenever the market starts to change to become that strong buyer's market if we ever see that again. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, and along the same lines of what you were saying, it takes a long time for these trends to really develop, but also there are these little peaks and valleys throughout the whole process, and there are opportunities and lots of individual homes that are experiencing totally different situations than you see on these graphs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, essentially we're not seeing a bubble here, and even in a bubble situation, it's not an overnight like, okay, now my house is worth nothing.
Exactly. It's not a, if you buy a home today on October 15th, that on October 16th, your home is worth 50% of that. It's
Right.
not like that.
Yes.
It takes time to transition is what we're getting at. And just for reference's sake, we've got all data pulled up for Davidson County. So that's Nashville's county right now. And 1.8 months of supply, that's an all-time low. We've never seen that. Even when, people talk about how strong the market was a couple of years ago. Let me move that back. Here we go. How strong the market was, saying like 16 and 17. That was 2.4 months of supply, 2.5 months of supply. We're at like, you know, 3/4 of that or 2/3 of that right now. We've never seen it look like this before, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, very, very unique market. Absolutely.
The other thing that I think is important, because I do think supply and demand is probably the leading indicator for what type of market that we're in. The other factor, though, that does impact how buyers behave, if this becomes a buyer's market, is going to be interest rates. And so what we've
Yeah.
got pulled up here is some historical data on interest rates. And you can see we've got almost a 10-year trend pulled up here for interest rates. They're low right now. There's no way around it. I mean, this is straight from FreddieMac.com. So basically this week, the week ending yesterday, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage average is 3.05%. That's historically low. I mean, it's not the historic low. As you can see, it was a little lower at the end of last year. However, it's still historically low. The reason I point this out is even interest rates tend to not jump by 2 to 3% at any given time. They do change, like you can see here from what the week ending in November of 2018. In a 2-year span, it went down almost 2%, around 2% from 2018 into 2020. And so that was a pretty major shift, but that was still a 2-year period.
Right.
And so, and the reason interest rates impact the market, and I don't want to get too in the weeds about things, but basically, somebody who's buying a home, their principal and interest payment at one price is going to be 10% higher if their interest rate is 1% higher, if that makes sense. So meaning if somebody's buying a $400,000 home, their principal and interest payment is the same as if they bought a $440,000 home at a 1% higher rate. And so that starts to affect the amount of buyers that can buy homes. So again, it ties back into this, what we were just talking about, supply and demand. That impacts demand, and that's what's going to impact the market. But again, even interest rates tend to not jump by 2 to 3% at any given time. Even when we saw this jump back in 2012 into 2013, yes, that was a pretty significant jump over a 30 to 60 day span. That's an anomaly. I mean, we've seen 2 of those in this 10-year period where it's an immediate jump. Most of the time, it's a slow rise or a slow dip.
Yep, absolutely. So basically, to summarize, we are not in 2006, 2008. There's no bubble situation here. What we're seeing here is really a pretty classic story of supply and demand, right? So in this situation, supply is very low because there aren't many people who are wanting to sell their house right now. And because interest rates are so low, affordability is higher than it normally is. So people can afford more house for less per month, and they're out there buying houses up faster than they normally would. Mm-hmm. That's leading to this very low months of supply. So if I have 30 houses, it's going to take them a shorter amount of time to sell than it would traditionally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting market. It's one that we've seen kind of develop over the last year or so, just being more and more dramatically a seller's market. So it's a great time to take an opportunity if you are a seller, if you have homes to sell.
And honestly, I think as a buyer as well. And I mean, I know we obviously would love to work with any home sellers that are out there, but buyers as well. We're happy to work with y'all as well. We want to help you become homeowners, and we don't want people to push pause on their plans because they're worried about the economy, because because I mean, COVID is still out there and a real thing. And I mean, there's things like, I know some retail chains aren't able to get goods to sell right now. I mean, like, there's stuff like that that's happening, and I know that's very real and actually happening in our world. I get it, and that does impact the economy. And yet that doesn't impact the real estate economy in a direct way as much as what this does that we just covered. And this is the true finger on the pulse of the real estate market. And so while we can speculate all day long about what might happen in the future based on what's happening in the economy, this is what we're seeing today. And historically, the real estate market does not shift overnight. It might start to shift overnight, and yet the dramatic changes happen over usually years.
Absolutely. So, Rob, if people have questions about this or anything else related to buying, selling, owning, investing, all of that, what should they do?
Well, they should reach out to us if they're seeing this on Facebook. Comment, PM us. We're happy to help any way that we can. If you're getting this in your email, just hit reply if you have a question. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can also always call us directly, 615-591-5665. We're always happy to help.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye.